Yeah? Okay. Any questions? Anything you need to know about anything? Anything you want to talk about in more detail? No? Okay. All right. So the topic for today, we're wrapping up our dive into machine learning and sort of making single decisions. And what I wanted to do was do a case study of one particularly important and relevant computer vision problem, which is object recognition. So the idea, I hope you can sort of see, is how the techniques that we're learning, like we're kind of in the sort of lectures and stuff, we're talking about them in theory on these really simple artificial data sets where there's like, 2 features, then we just made up the data. So you can see how the algorithm works and get an intuition for it. So this is sort of the other end of that spectrum, talking about how these algorithms actually fit into real systems. And you're seeing this in partly through your project doing the spam filter. So this isn't going to be like implementation, but I kind of wanted to talk about how this stuff fits into computer vision. And we're going to basically start out like with the sort of classic machine learning formulation. We're going to talk about the features people use for computer vision, the training algorithms they use, the data sets that they use, how they pick them. And then we're going to talk about, we're going to sort of add more stuff to it until we get to kind of state-of-the-art method. So the state-of-the-art object recognition system is built by our own Pedro Feltenswab. He's a professor in the School of Engineering here at Brown. So it's something that somebody here does. And we're going to talk about how that system actually works. So this is the best we know how to do for object recognition today. And the other thing I want to do is talk about like this kind of existential, I don't want to get too angsty, but like there's these questions about any of these problems, the ways that we formalize them. So object recognition itself has been formalized by the community, by a lot of people, by different researchers in a very particular way as sort of look, here's a picture, tell me where all the people are in the picture, tell me where all the chairs are, tell me where all the cats are. But that's not the only way to formalize what computer vision really is. And I don't think and I think a lot of people will agree with this, it's not the best way for many applications. So I want us to do a little bit of thinking about other ways of framing those questions. And we'll talk a little bit about some things other people in the literature, other people in the field are doing to ask these questions in different ways, maybe trying to ask better questions. But a lot of it still builds on the ideas that we get from object recognition, and from the data that we have. Okay, so first of all, what is object recognition? So what I'm talking about when I say this is basically you have a picture and you're trying to find stuff in the picture. So a really common application of this is trying to find faces. And a lot of, like we probably all have cameras now that have this technology running on your camera, on your cell phone, where you hold up your camera and it draws the little square box around all the faces, right? So that's doing an instance of this problem. It's a face detector. So everyone know what I'm talking about? That thing? Yeah, okay. And there's sort of, nefarious, a lot of interest actually in this technology in surveillance footage in airports, right? So I have a picture of a bad guy and I want to have a computer watch all the surveillance cameras in all the airports and tell me if they see him. And then, stop, maybe he's on the no-fly list or something. So that's the sort of the government's version of it, but of course we have a lot of privacy concerns with that too, like if we have this technology. It might be able to track you as you're walking around, and we can put cameras are increasingly present in our lives, and so sort of face recognition itself is kind of a thing. There's a ton of applications in robotics. So if you're a robot and you have a camera, you might like to be able to find objects in the world. So maybe somebody wants a stapler or they want a coffee mug or something, and you'd like to go deliver it. Well, if you could look at a picture and say, well, this is a coffee mug, or this is a stapler, then maybe you could pick it up and hand it to the person. So the next step of that is actually manipulating objects. So that's sort of, once you have the detection, how do you go from having that detection, like knowing that this camera image that I took has a mug in it, to actually moving your arm around in 3D space, not 2D camera space, but 3D space, so that it achieves a force closure around that object, and when you lift, it actually picks it up. And there's a lot of, so that's like moving, once you've got the detection, that's just the start of your problems, because you have to actually pick it up. And then also there's a lot of issues in not just manipulating objects, but like autonomous operations. So like the Google car needs to be able to see stop signs, right? and traffic lights. It needs to be able to know if the traffic light is red, yellow, or green. And if it doesn't know that, it's going to start running red lights, and that would be bad, right? So not just manipulating objects, but being able to respond appropriately to the environment requires this kind of detection. So I was talking to my friend at Google when I was in California 2 weeks ago, and he was telling me that the main thing that they use computer vision for right now is traffic lights. So like they don't rely on it for identifying people or cars or things like that right now because it's not reliable enough. But for traffic lights, it works pretty well, and it's basically the only sensor they have that can do it, right? Because there's not like, you can't bounce a laser off a traffic light and see what color it is. You have to kind of look at the colors. So this is like the main place where computer vision is used in the Google car. But it's something that people think is sort of important to make it especially run in like unstructured, unmapped environments where you, like with pedestrians around and and like traffic lights and stuff like that. So a lot of the Google car right now is happening on the freeway, where they sort of avoid some of these kinds of situations. And then of course, like finding images. So like I say, how many of you guys save all the pictures you take? And yeah, on your cameras, you have this big database of pictures. How many of you have had trouble finding that picture that you took, 2 years ago at that wedding or something? Yeah? That's a problem I have a lot. Or like I'm trying to do something with my pictures. I don't just want to have a hard drive that could fail with all these pictures. I'd like to make a book of something to give to my mom or something like that. You're trying to find and you're just looking at all these pictures. It takes forever. Wouldn't it be nice if you could say, well, show me a picture of Jay, my son Jay, when he was between 6 months and 1 year old. If I could say that and it could come back with images. So this is not technology that we have yet, but this is technology that's on the horizon. So like Facebook now can do really, really good face recognition and person recognition. And you can imagine plugging that into your own personal photography database, or you can already upload your photos to Facebook, and actually search for images by name, by names using these techniques. And then of course you can search in Google Image. We can do like a demo of this. All right, so here's Google image search, and I can type something. What do we want to search for?
Cats.
Cats. Cats. And it works, right? Like, I come up with all of these pictures of cats. And part of how this is working is that a lot of these images have text around them of, like, cats, right? So you can use that to find images. But they also use actual image-based features. So they can actually look at the pixels in those images and tell you something about what the content is. So if you're trying to make slides for something or make a presentation or something like that, or just learn more about a topic like what breeds of cats there are or something, you can actually do this and find these pictures. Okay, so that's sort of the applications of object recognition. So now let's sort of start from the beginning and ask ourselves, what's an image? So what is an image? Yeah. An array of pixels. Yeah. So that's one representation for what an image is, and that's the one we're going to be using. What's a pixel? Yeah.
It depends on your color space, but if you do RGB color space, usually it's 3 values representing RGB.
Yeah. So basically, we're going to have there be a grid. So let's draw a picture of a picture. So like there be a grid, and each grid cell, usually they're square, but I can't draw squares. So each grid cell here is called a pixel. And you can think of this as being a particular color. So like, so if it's a grayscale image, it'll be some shade of gray. You can also have a binary image that's black and white. So like kind of a line drawing or something like that. And you can have a full color image. So usually people use RGB, red, green, and blue. So then, so if it's a binary image, this can be 0 or 1. If it's a grayscale image, you can use one number to represent how dark the color is. So 0 is usually black, and 255 is white, and you can have any intensity in between there. If it's an RGB image, or we'll talk about color spaces, you can have 3 different values to represent. So you'll have an R value that ranges between 0 and 255, a green value, a red value, a green value, and a blue value. And together, those can give you all the colors that we can see. So when you sort of zoom, this is a really zoomed in view, so you've probably seen this when you zoom in on a picture or something, it looks really pixelated because you can see the pixels. So each one of these will be a particular color. And when we zoom out, then we get to see. And when people talk about this, a common model that we use is called the pinhole camera. So where these images come from is we have some kind of sensor, a camera sensor, where photons come in from the world, and this is sort of the simplest model of what a camera can be. They come through this little hole, and then they get projected onto some light-sensitive thing. So like when we first had cameras, this light-sensitive thing was done with like chemistry, right? So we had, I don't remember the actual name, like some kind of silver compound that reacted in a special way when photons of different wavelengths hit it, and then there was a process to blow this up and actually give you pictures. Now we have digital cameras, so there's like basically transistors, special photo-aware transistors that react to the photons wavelengths and output one of these images. And in a real camera, this won't be a pinhole, we'll have a lens. What that lets you do, so a pinhole, the sort of trade-off is like the smaller the pinhole, the better the focus, but you get fewer photons. And so it's just hard, you get less data basically. It's harder to see what's going on out there. There's more noise, it's darker. So if you have a lens, you can collect more photons but still have them focused. And there's all this physics about it, which I don't know. But if you're a camera enthusiast, you probably know way more about it than I do. So you get this image plane in the back, and the output of that is a picture. So here's one picture where it's really zoomed out, and of course if we zoom in, you'll see the individual pixels of what goes on. So you mentioned color spaces? Yeah. So what can go inside of these pixels is different for like people. There's sort of some questions about the best way to represent the different colors in our pictures. So RGB is sort of the base one. So this can be represented as a cube. There's 3 numbers here. Blue, which can be between 0 and 255. And it's just like a scaling thing. Like we use that because we use that like 8 bits to represent the RGB value. So that's why it's 0 to 255. You could do it at finer grains, or you could do it at coarser grains, and there's sort of differences in the resolutions of your colors. But most often 0 to 255 is what we use. So blue, red, and green. So if your blue is here in this corner, blue is all the way on and everything else is all the way off, you have a nice blue color. In this corner, red is all the way on, and everything else is all the way off, so you have red color, the pure red. In this corner, it's green, and then everywhere in between, you can get all the other colors that we can see. So that's RGB, the sort of most, I think it's the most intuitive one. Like it kind of matches what, like what we learned as kids when we were playing with finger paint and stuff like that. Like you kind of mix colors together and stuff happens. But there's other systems that tend to work better for computer vision because they factor the color space in a different way. So this is one of the most common ones, hue, saturation, and value. So this is like a cylinder that ranges over all of the colors. And then saturation is kind of how light versus how dark the pixel is. And then value is like the illumination of the color scheme. And this can give you better features, and it's kind of murky, like when you read about these different systems. And there's a bunch of other ones, you can go read about them all. It's kind of murky about which is which and when you want to use one and when you want to use the other. But it's worth knowing that they're out there in terms of the way they represent these images. So we have this kind of image matrix, basically. So you have a picture, and for each pixel coordinate, I and j, so like the row and the column, you have this triple of values for a color picture of RGB or HSV or something else in your color space. Okay, so now we have this picture. What we want to do is find all the people. So pedestrian detection is a pretty common application of object recognition because we don't want our robots to hit people, we don't want our cars to hit people, and we do want our surveillance systems to know where the people are and what they're doing. So a lot of people work on this problem. So if we're going to do this, how would you guys approach this problem? What are some strategies you might use to automatically find the people? Yeah?
search for common geometries that
Yeah.
people tend to share, and then look for solid blocks of, or at least close blocks of a particular color range that contain those geometries?
Yeah, so you're going to kind of like break this picture down into smaller components and then have some kind of detector that looks for geometries or colors or some kind of visual features, right? Yeah, that maps to what a person looks like to us. So like, we can sort of see what that looks like. So color's a little tricky though, because you can see that people are lots of different colors. We like to wear clothes and yeah.
Well, I said that you don't look
Yeah.
for a particular color, you look
Yeah.
for a particular area of a
Yeah.
color range.
Yeah, okay, so you're talking about like segmentation. Yeah, so what you might do is say, well, everything in this kind of area is a pretty similar color range. So I'm gonna segment that as one object, and then I'm gonna ask if this if this sort of coherent region matches the geometry of what a person actually looks like. Yeah, so a lot of people work on the segmentation problem, so trying to find the coherent regions in an image with color and texture and features like that. Yeah.
We could do what we did, train a classifier and then sweep around.
Yeah. So that, so that's a higher level. I think you were sort of saying, sweeping, right? Like we're going to search for the regions in the image. And this idea of sweeping through the image and running a classifier is what people do. So you basically have this thing of like a sliding, they call it the sliding window, and you just kind of run a window through the image at different scales and run your person detector on that individual image, and hopefully it fires when there's a person inside and not at other times. And I'm showing this sort of doing a tiling kind of approach in practice and all at one scale. In practice, people will do it at different scales, so they'll have really big windows and they'll have really small windows, and they'll do overlapping tiles. So in case I was like, my bar was like halfway through the person, if I had an overlapping tile, one of those tiles should give me a good crop, essentially, of where the person is. Yes?
Do people ever do like searching negatively? Like you find where all the non-humans are, and like you extrapolate the floor should do this, but actually there are some things in the way, so I'm going to assume those things are interesting, and then...
Yeah, so that's back to this idea of segmentation. So people do that a lot. They do it based on color. So like you might say, well, this whole, what you're talking about, people would call foreground-background segmentation. So they would kind of look for the background region, and everything not on the background is the foreground, and that's the cool stuff, right? And then we'll only have to run our classifier, which is typically expensive. This is slow, right? So doing this on all the images is slow. So then we'll only have to run our classifier on the good stuff, the stuff where we think something is happening. Yeah, so there's actually a lot, and I don't actually know this literature very well, so there's a lot of work on exactly, on good strategies for where to put your windows and what classifiers to run when. But that's the basic approach, is that we're, without going into like the details of all the algorithms for this, the basic approach is we're going to be like running on little subsets of this image, we're going to crop out some piece of it, and then we're going to ask the question, is there a person in this subset? So why is that easier than doing this on the whole image? Is it easier? Yep.
So like if you had some kind of training data, which was a lot of pictures of people, then like there are less total features to deal with. Because like you could just compare every image ever which has people to this image.
Yeah.
Or you could compare only the like or sort of people size.
Yeah. Right. So that's right. So it's a lot easier if you're trying to detect a person where there's actually without all this extra stuff in the background. Like this lamp here, it's really pretty, but like it doesn't really give you any information at all about whether or not there's people. Maybe it gives you a little bit because there's like a prior. Like if there's a lamp, there's probably people there to use it or something. But it really doesn't tell you like where the people are. Sort of in the coordinate system, and there's a lot of variation for what could be here. So like this is a shot from MIT, but like you could have lots of different artwork and lots of different styles of chandeliers, and you could have an outdoor picture, and none of that's really going to directly bear on whether there's whether or where the person is. So there's a potential for a lot more generalization if you can really focus on the parts of the image where the person actually is. Yes.
Well, couldn't you technically, if you had some kind of way of recognizing an illuminated structure, or a couple kinds of illuminated structures, couldn't you use it to orient the picture in space to see where the people should be relative to?
Yeah, I like that idea. So we'll talk about this in terms of dataset bias. So this is actually a problem with our robots. So these pictures, I actually don't know for sure, but like a lot of the pictures and a lot of our training sets were taken by people. So what does that mean about them? Yeah?
The area that they're standing has to be able to have people in it?
That's true, yeah, right. So we're talking about environments where there are people because you're there and taking the picture, usually, unless you're like a Mars rover or something, yeah.
The person is more likely to take a sort of interesting picture rather than pointing the camera straight up.
Right. So going back to your question, like you probably wouldn't take this picture. You're going to be oriented in the right direction. And your camera actually tells you that. Like it'll tell you, like when you get a picture now, it tells you the orientation of it as part of the metadata of the picture. So not a lot of computer vision research works on the problem you just said for that reason, for this kind of artificial, I don't know if it's artificial or not, but like the reason that a lot of the pictures they're working on are taken by people. Almost all of them were taken by people. And so they are nice pictures. This is actually a kind of funny example of this, of the kinds of bias this creates. If we go back to our search, let's search for mugs. So these are mugs. Oh, cats and mugs. This nice. Go Google. This still kind of gets my point. Let's just do mugs though to avoid the. No, we like the cat mugs. So here's some mug pictures. Some mug shots, yeah. So it turns out that when people take pictures of mugs, a lot of times, like non-randomly, the mug handle is to the right and not to the left. Like people just like to do that. So there's some to the left in this picture, but sort of statistically, if you look, most of them are to the right. And that's going to screw up your detector, right? Because if you are a robot, like you have no way of knowing that the mug is to the right or to the left. And if you don't have a balanced training set that shows the different orientations, it's going to break. So when you start to compare the images from a person versus the images from a robot, a lot of the issues like the one you're talking about, orientation and the view of the object and where it's centered in the picture and stuff like that, become really important because I want to match that to my training set and sort of figure out where things are. Yes?
Can you also train on the mirror?
Yeah, so people do that. So for this particular issue, you can just flop the image around. And in Pedro's paper, actually, they say they do that. Like they just take the mirror image of all the pictures to control for that. But in general, you have there's lots of different types of occlusion that could happen, not just the mirror in 3D space, right? So like even if you look, a lot of these are side views of mugs. But if I'm a robot and I'm kind of looking at the world, I might get a lot of top views, looking down, and maybe if it's up on a shelf, I might get a bottom view, and those aren't in the sets, and you can't reconstruct those from these photos. Okay. Where did my slides go? Okay. So basically, what we're going to do is this kind of sliding window kind of approach. So we're going to try to make a detector that recognizes objects when in a crop of an image, so like basically a smaller image, where that object is sort of filling up most of the image. And the way that we're going to do this, the way people usually do this, is with machine learning. So here's like your standard machine learning pipeline. You have a training set. So here's a training set with an example of a person in the image in that crop, and an example without a person. And you have these labels. So here's some pixels, and here's the label. This is a person. And here's some other pixels, and it's a negative label. It's something else, and maybe it's nothing else. Maybe it's just parts of other objects, but it's not a person in this image. So what do we do next in machine learning? We have training data. Yeah?
You have to define the actual features?
Yeah, right. We have to have features. So we somehow go from this to a feature vector. Okay, so like we were calling it W for when we're doing these linear combinations of features. Of course, there's other things like decision trees where there are like these little rules. But even with decision trees, you have to have like a feature vector that tells you what's doing. So we have to have some features. And then what we do?
Learn.
We learn. Yeah, we optimize something, right? So different optimizations for different algorithms, and we talked about that last time. And somehow you get a learned model. So I wrote this as a probabilistic model. It doesn't have to be, as we talked about, but somehow you get something that can say the probability that this is a person given the pixels in the image patch. That's what you're trying to get. And then you can do your tiling. So what we're going to talk about today, sort of within this framework, is how people do this. So like the training data that they like to use, that people typically use for images, and we'll talk about some of the problems that that exist in the training sets, but also like what it's gotten us, because these training sets they're powerful and they advance the state of the art a lot, but they also have limitations. It is important to see both in any machine learning problem. So it's kind of like a case study. As you go to new machine learning problems, you have to ask yourself, what training data am I going to use, and is it going to help me solve the problem I want to solve? We're going to talk about the features. It's not obvious to me, at least when I went into computer vision. I think it's still not obvious. Like, what are the right features to use? You have this big array, 2D array of pixels, and somehow you have to convert that to good features that capture what's going on in that image. And a lot of the research that's going on in computer vision is about coming up with these features. And we'll talk about the current state-of-the-art type of features that's sort of most popular right now. But there's sort of a lot of work in this area. And then better models. So our first pass through this, we'll really talk about the training data and the feature, and what people used with these features was basically SVM models, support vector machines, which you could pick your favorite framework. But the state-of-the-art thing, basically what Pedro did that advanced this sort of base model that just used SVMs on really good features, like the first advance was really good features, which we'll talk about. Pedro's advance was a better model. So it's not just a classifier, it's this parts-based model that uses latent variables, and we'll talk about what that looks like to make things work a lot better. Okay. So the training data, I'll get into more examples of it, but basically what it's going to look like is positive and negative examples of particular classes. So you're going to have positive examples of people and negative examples of people somehow. Somebody annotated them, or you annotated them, or something like that. So what do you guys think about features? What are some good features we could do to recognize a person? Yeah.
Sort of abrupt differences in color between more or less 3 parts of the picture: the face, the torso, and the legs.
Yeah, so you can kind of know that like there's supposed to be this face up here, this torso, and the legs. Look for differences in edges. Yeah, I like that. Let me write this down. So abrupt differences in color in specific areas. What else?
When you say a person detector, do you also essentially sort of mean a face detector, because you're assuming that you wouldn't really take a picture of a person and just sort of walk off their head?
Well, a lot of these are security cameras that might not be from the right angle.
Yeah, so the techniques that we'll be talking about are used for many different object classes. So like typical object classes in these data sets are people and bicycles and cats and horses and cars and cups and if you look at the specific data sets, you can see more. Those are like the most popular ones, I guess. The larger data sets will have many, many, many more classes. So like the smaller data sets have the smallest one that we'll talk about has 20 different classes, and it includes people as one of them. That's like a very common one. It does not include faces as a separate class, but you could if you wanted to. And the largest ones include I guess it would be ImageNet. So ImageNet is one that is based off of WordNet. So for every word in English, it has pictures, one or more pictures that's supposed to be of that word. So the classes, if you think of it, are like every single word is a different class. So there's lots of nouns in English, so there's lots of these pictures. Lots of potential classes. Does that answer your question? Or no?
Well, my question was like,
Yeah.
if a face is a really important part of
Yeah.
how you're going to tell a person that
Yeah.
has the most detailed features,
Yeah.
focusing on that would make sense.
Yeah, so I could build a face detector instead of a person detector
Or as part of it.
as part of a person detector. Yeah. What?
Part-based.
Part-based, yeah. So that's basically what Pedro did. as his advance over these basic classes. So that's good. The model that we'll talk about first does not do that. It looks for, we'll talk about the features that it uses. And it might be the case that the features it uses, like some subset of them would correspond to faces and others would correspond to torso and others would correspond to legs. But that's not baked into the model. So the advance that Pedro did was to bake that into the model in an explicit way. So it's a really good idea. And it turns out that it works really well. And we'll see how as we go on in class today. OK, more. So what are other ideas for features? Yeah.
Wait, never mind.
OK.
Well, I just have, I know some of them.
OK.
141, so it would be weird. You can take the gradient, though.
Yeah, right. So this is basically corresponding to the gradient. Gradient. Yes. What else?
For the abrupt changes in color,
Yeah.
You would want to find ones, changes in color that aren't along perfectly straight lines.
Yeah, OK. So not along straight lines, because people aren't straight. And really, there might be some particular pattern of that, right? Like not just not a straight line, but like there's some kind of particular circular shape to the head and stuff that you might want to look for. Yeah. Anybody else? Yeah.
I mean, you might always want to do color, so you might want to just look at,
Yeah.
I don't know, ways of converting it to another way. Because sometimes, like, if you
Yeah.
have a shadow and a shadow, it's hard to define an abrupt change.
Yeah.
Whereas humans can see a computer.
I don't understand the question.
Oh, no,
Yeah.
I'm saying there's
Yeah.
other spaces other than color, I guess you could
Yeah.
convert to.
Yeah. To like not RGB, but like HSV or like
different, or like a change in value.
a change in value or something like that. Yeah. Right.
Oh.
Yeah. So kind of looking at these changes. So if we're going to do this, how can we actually, what's that?
No, RGB, like
Yeah.
if it just changes red, then
Yeah.
it's not changing red, it changes like dark.
Right, so it might matter that it's changing in red versus green or something like that. And the colors of specific things might matter. So okay, so the abrupt changes thing is what people do, like this idea of these gradient-based methods. So how can we represent the gradient of things in a feature vector? Like, what would that actually look like? 'Cause we need to get this into a vector, a finite vector of features, so we can assign high weight to certain elements in that vector that hopefully let it classify people. Yeah.
I mean, you can just kind of discretize the picture and take a chunk of pixels,
Yeah.
and then take the delta
Yeah.
red in this direction, and
Yes.
the delta green and the delta blue.
Yes. So this is like the basic idea for how people create feature vectors out of images. So what you're talking about is a histogram. Do you guys know this already? Like, is this useful to do it in this way? Who's taken computer vision before? Some of you. Oh, most of you. Half of you. Okay. So maybe some of this is like review. This idea of the histogram representation of the world. So I'm going to look at the gradient of things, or I'm going to look at the colors in the image. I'm going to bin the different values. So maybe I'll have 10 bins for all the different possible color values of red in that patch, or 10 bins for all the different orientations that the gradient could take. And the feature associated with that pixel is just what direction the gradient is at that time. And what I can do is basically compute this feature at lots of different patches within this patch. So I've already got a smaller image patch, but this one's small enough that I can just have a finite number of, like, let's say 8 by 8 patches. Maybe I'll do some bigger ones too. Maybe I'll get a total of 100 different patches, and each one of those patches will have the discrete value of which bin that histogram fell into. Does that kind of make sense? So I think it's easier, we'll talk about the gradient next. I think it's easier to think about in terms of color histograms because color is kind of more intuitive. So like for each image patch, then for each pixel, you can compute the color of that pixel. So like you look at the R, the G, and the B, and then you bin the colors. So you say, well, I'm going to have bins of 10 pixel size each, and this pixel's red value is in bin 0, or maybe it's in bin 5, or maybe it's in bin 10. And that's the value of the red feature for that pixel. And I can do this over all the different patches and get a feature vector. So this is color histograms. So here's an example of what this looks like for a particular image. So here, this is like using RG and B, and you can see this image. So each point in this graph is showing the number of pixels with that green value. This is the number of pixels with this red value and the number of pixels with the blue value. So does that make sense to everybody how you're doing this? So you kind of just go through every single pixel in this image and count up the number of times the green value was this, and this, and every time you get a number. And that's how you're plotting for this histogram. Yes?
So is this for like the entire image?
This is for the entire image. This one is for the entire image. It's discretized at the pixel level of the image. Now you could also do this by chunk. And you could either average the pixels in that chunk or smooth them with like a Gaussian smoothing algorithm or something like that. In this case, they're just doing it pixel by pixel. But those other approaches are used for the gradient-based features we'll talk about next. Okay, so this is kind of cool. Like this idea of histograms is important. Is an important tool for thinking about how to featureize images. It's used a lot in order to give you these feature vectors that we need to give to our machine learning algorithms. Yes?
So what is the x-axis in this graph?
The x-axis is the value of the color. So in an RGB space, it would go from 0 to 255. I actually don't know the discretization in this picture, but like it looks pretty small, so I'm just going to say 0 to 255. If I had fewer bins, I could have fewer bins, right? So I could say I'm going to go from 0 to 10, and each bin is going to correspond to 255 divided by 10 pixels. I could have nonlinear bins, so I could say, well, I want more bins in the center and fewer bins at the edge, and so I want you to sprinkle my histograms in a different way. But this is sort of just linear bins with pixels in that way. Does that make sense, everybody? Okay. And then you can sort of say, well, if there's more like a grasp, you can even imagine doing scene segmentation with this. Like an outdoors picture is going to have blue and lots of green, or a road picture might have more darker colors, and I don't know, like an indoor picture is going to have different colors in an outdoor picture. You can characterize scene just by looking at the color maps. But the problem is, as you guys have already brought up, is that there's different lighting conditions and stuff. These color features turn out to not be very robust to a lot of the variation that we see in lighting and rotation and occlusion in terms of our features. So there's lots of types of distortion that we can have from our camera. So it can be foreshortened, like if we're looking at it straight on versus looking at it from the top. That was like our mug example. Our mugs were looking, in Google image search, we're looking at them straight on. But if a robot took a picture with its camera, or you're looking at something in the background, or maybe your surveillance footage, which wasn't being aimed, you might get this kind of foreshortening. There's this rotation, like this aspect ratio. So like in no pictures of those mugs was the handle not visible. Maybe there was one, but like almost all of them you could see the handle when people were taking the pictures. But in real life, of course, it could be occluded, and that makes it look very different. People are hard because they move, and animals and stuff. So it could actually, the object could actually change its configuration in real life and deformation, right? So that's going to make it look different. And occlusion. So important parts of the image could be hidden by itself or by other things. Yes?
When you're talking about color distortion, like
Yeah.
RGB values,
Yeah.
what if you use like HSV stuff to deal with the shadows?
Yeah, that's one of the reasons people use HSV to make that look better. And that helps, but you're still not going to get the. So what we'll never really capture is the idea of like the shape of that handle. So like you can really tell it's a mug. Like one of the most distinctive features of a mug is the handle, and it has that particular shape. A bin of colors is going to tell you, like, maybe you could do foreground background segmentation and say, okay, there's, I don't know, 700 or 100 white pixels and 400 black pixels, but a lot of different shapes could match that color distribution, and it wouldn't be able to really see that this handle had a particular shape. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but as far as like when you're telling whether or not to cut an object into two based on like a shadow and half of it, then if you just sort of like look at the hue instead of the saturation, you'd still know that they're
Yeah.
the same thing.
Yeah. So I don't know specifically how HSV fixes those kinds of problems, but my mental model is that HSV fixes a lot of those kinds of problems, but not all of them. So it's sort of, there's these really great illusions where they show you the same, maybe I should have stuck it up here. They show you the same color, but like one is, I accidentally mailing this, one's it's in shadow and one it's not. And it's, if you actually zoom in GIMP or something, you can see it's the actual same RGB value, but it looks dramatically different to the human eye. And that's really hard to deal with. Like it does look different to us, and there's different 3D configurations that we're inferring from those types of images. But the RGB value, or even the HSV value, it's the exact same, right? Like you can't get it out. You have to look at the image, the pixel in its context to infer the stuff that you're talking about. Okay. All right. So we guys already talked about the sort of way that we can get around some of these problems. So sort of histograms of gradients. And these are some of the acronyms people use for different versions of these gradient-based features, so SIFT and SURF. So HOG is what we're going to talk about, histogram of oriented gradients. So what we're going to do is for each patch of the image, so let's say like by 8 by 8 pixels, we're going to go in each pixel and we're going to compute the gradient direction and magnitude at that pixel. And you can just do it empirically by looking at the relative value of that pixel versus its neighbors and get the direction of the biggest change. And then you discretize. So that's, it's already kind of discretized because if you're at like 8 by 8, because there's only a finite number of cells around you. But if you're doing it at a larger scale versus a smaller scale, you somehow discretize it. So there might be 8 or 10 or 180. You can sort of decide how fine-grained you want to make it discretized. Different directions that the gradient could be pointing in. And then you make a histogram of that in order to capture these shape features. So you sort of bin them and then return the most frequent directions. So here's what this looks like. And this is the paper that introduced this idea. And it's sort of like a generalization of SIFT, which came along earlier. So you have this image, and then you can basically make you sort of, like a lot of computer papers, you see these kinds of pictures where they're showing the brightness of the little line corresponds to the histograms that the gradients, the direction of the change that was most salient in that particular patch of the image. So you can sort of kind of see it kind of corresponds to what's going on. Like there's these lines of the floor down here, and it kind of looks vertical, and then there's like this separation there, and there's these horizontal lines, and then the person starts to come in, so there's these vertical lines in here. And this is just done by creating these bins of the different directions of change in the image. And it turns out that when you do this, you can train, and in this paper they trained a support vector machine classifier, and the features are just which, in this sort of patch, like which one of these components has the most, is lit up. Does that make sense? So here we're showing the inside of the SBM, like once it learns a person classifier, these are the features, these are the gradients that were most informative. These are the ones that got the highest feature weight. And what's cool is it kind of looks like a person. You can kind of see the head shape up there like we were talking about, and the shoulders, and then the torso, and then the feet. Yes?
So is it associating each of those individual gradients with a person, or associating that collection of gradients?
It's associating this collection of gradients with the person. So it's, and that's kind of why there's these two shadows of the head over there, because like it might be a little bit misaligned, right? So it wants to see this gradient in this location, and if that's there, it's going to assign some weight for this to be a true detection of a person. And if it's not there, that weight from that particular feature will not be assigned as a detection of a person. Yeah.
So that each of those specific angles is
Yeah.
a separate feature?
Each of those specific angles is a separate feature. So what you're seeing in this picture is like the specific features of those specific angles that were assigned after training that the SVM gave high weight to. It's drawing them in this picture here. And the cool thing is it kind of looks like a person. And there's another, Antonio Torralba, who does a lot of work in this area, has this really cool slide where he looks at false detections. So like you'll see like this picture of like water or something, and a person detection classifier fired on it and says there's a person here, and like you look at it, you're like, obviously there's not. But then what he does is he shows you this picture, and it's really weird. Like if you look at it in the feature space, it really does look like a person. It's creepy. Like there's this ghost person in the picture that it's making. So this is the negative components. Like it's less intuitive. This is the features that, if they're there, indicate it's not a person. Sort of the inverse of the other features. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. So that, this paper was in 2005. It now has 7,700 citations. It was pretty influential in terms of how we do object recognition. And it's still the most popular feature set. It's what Pedro uses in his classifier too, these types of features. A lot of what people are doing now is looking at other sensors. So like, who's heard of the Kinect, Microsoft Kinect? Most of you. Yeah, so this is it's a really cool sensor. It's RGB, so it gives you a picture. Does anybody else know what else it gives you? In the back. Yeah, it gives you a depth map. So for each pixel, not only does it tell you the color, it tells you, it bounces infrared light off of the world. It tells you how far away the pixel is from you. So you can actually get a 3D point cloud from one of these pictures. And a lot of people are working on coming up with features that work in those kinds of cameras as well. And so that's sort of the what a lot of people in computer vision are doing in terms of feature spaces. Okay, so machine learning, training set, features, learn model. So the next thing we're going to talk about is the training data that people use for this. So we're sort of working on, somehow we get these labels of people and not people. So how can we get these types of training examples? Yeah.
Ask the internet.
You can ask the internet. Yeah, so we can go to Google image search and we can search for people. We could actually do it and see what comes up.
Well, I mean, like
Yeah.
ask people through the internet.
Yeah, we could okay, so one way is to just ask Google, which is sort of like asking the internet. A second way is to ask people to actually annotate pictures on the internet. So we could show somebody, let's see if I, so we could show somebody a picture like the one I just flashed up for a sec. Let me not start in the middle of my slide deck though. So we could show somebody a picture like this one and ask people to label it. So there is a project that does exactly this. It's called Label Me. And I mentioned it to Antonio Torralba. He's the guy that started it. So this is a picture from Label Me, and these are the labels that the internet gave for this picture. What do you think?
Looks like there was a murder.
Yeah, yeah, it's kind of funny. They have this like interesting little stick figure down there. So it's really interesting because there's some really nice stuff here. Like there's like this thing that looks like a door. Somebody gave a really nice boundary for these windows. And the light, they do one of the individual lights. They do the tree. There's nice ones for all the people. Somebody even drew little ones around the hands of the individual person. There's also a lot of noise in these images, as you can see. And they have some correction heuristics, I guess, for correcting for this type of noise. They can have multiple people label it and see which ones are overlapping and only take the good ones. So it's unlikely that two people will decide to do a little a guy like that or a star like that. There's another approach people have taken is to turn this into a game. So like Louis von Ahn at CMU made this game where two people play and one person is trying to convey an object in the image to the other person, and the way they do this is by revealing different parts of the image. And the faster they can label the object, the better the pair does. And so in this way, like you're clicking on different parts of an object, and it's sort of uncovering the exact parts of the image that correspond to that object label. So Label Me is actually pretty good. There's quite a few images in it, and it's got a lot of data that's been corrected. One of the other interesting things Antonio talks about, though, is that there's this interesting distribution of annotators. So like when you sort of think about having the internet label these images, you might think of a lot of people doing a little bit of work, and then you get a large data set. But what it actually looks like when you look at the annotators in Label Me is it's like this. There's a few like power annotators who've annotated a lot of images. And then there's a long tail of people who've annotated just a couple of images in the data set. And it turns out that there's also a difference in quality of these annotators. So there's a few annotators who are really, really good, and then a long tail of annotators who are more unreliable. Yes?
Wouldn't you need to be concerned that some people just happen to get their kicks from annotating everything absolutely wrong?
Yes, you have to be concerned about that.
Some of the people who'd be in the upper end would in fact be the less reliable?
Yeah, so that's something that you have to deal with, and you know they look. You have to actually look at what you're getting and see if it's good and iterate in your metrics. So how you're doing your cross-checking and stuff. In Antonio's case, in the case of Label Me, he gives this really funny talk about it. It turns out that the annotator who does the most images is his mom. Like his mom, when they made this interface, thought it was really fun, and she gives. They actually looked at what she did. Like she gives the really high quality annotations and does lots and lots of them. And so what he sort of took away from this is like, you know, we could be having people on the internet do it for free and running this website and doing all these error correction things, or we could just hire his mom and and have her do these annotations. And you know, since they've been identified, you know, so another way to say that is identify a few high quality annotators, and train them and have them do these types of annotations. So people take both approaches to collecting these types of data sets. And Label Me, still is you can actually log on if you want and go and annotate some images. But there's also a lot of these more curated data sets where they've hired people or researchers themselves sat down and annotated data. One of the things that I've taken away from my machine learning forays is it's actually very valuable for you to sit down and annotate some data. It helps you think about what problem you really want your classifier to do, and it helps you think about like what the features are and give a real intuition for the problem. So I have spent a lot of my time as a researcher annotating my own data for that reason, and I think it's a worthwhile activity. So what's another problem with this idea of the way of we're just going to draw shapes around things and then label them? Even if we have Antonio's mom, we have a high quality annotator doing this stuff. Yeah.
Well, we don't know like what level we're going for, like
yeah.
windows, or do you want like the little panes in the window?
Exactly. Yeah. So there's a lot of you can see here even this is happening. So somebody labeled this whole chandelier, and they decided they're going to break it into these two components, the lights and then the chain that's holding up the lights. And then somebody else, or maybe the same person, put one label around just one of these lights, and you can sort of imagine doing that for all the individual lights. And it's really kind of arbitrary, how you would make those decisions. It's not clear what's right or wrong or what's better or worse about the way that you're making those annotation decisions. And it's also not clear like what labels you might want to associate with this. Like you could call this a chandelier, you could call it a light, you could call it a ceiling fixture. And it's not clear for the task that you're doing which one is best. It's actually going to be different for different tasks. So when you look at these sort of other data sets that are out there, this is a problem that goes through a lot of them. So like so one of them is called Caltech 101, or there's in 256, where they just picked 256 different categories, and then they came up with pictures that matched all of them. So there's like object-based data sets that are really focused on specific classes of objects, and like people and bikes and cars are popular ones because they have lots of applications. But like if you're, for me, like as a roboticist, these are kind of problematic because for my specific task, I'm working on robot childcare right now, we want a diaper detector, and diapers are not in Caltech 101. So not only does that mean I have to come up with my own data to train a detector like that, it means that the features and the algorithms and stuff, they're really not optimized for that particular subtask that I needed a detector for. It's kind of a limitation in the training data. So this is examples of pictures from these data sets. So Pascal is the same kind, is also, it's a smaller set of classes, but they try to have more realistic scenes. So there's more noise in the background than the Caltech data. ImageNet's the one I mentioned before. It's images organized according to the WordNet hierarchy. So like these are pictures of buildings and an office environment. So people on the internet kind of like Label Me, associated these images with particular chunks of words in the WordNet universe. And then Sun is another common data set. So different, again, these kind of scene-based ones. So there's sort of like a high-level division between object-based ones that really focus on these specific objects and giving lots of examples of different object classes versus these scene-based ones that try to situate the objects in more realistic scenes. So what's interesting about this is that the advent of these types of data sets, not just in computer vision and object recognition, but in lots of different domains, the advent of a data set, like say Caltech 101, where we have these objects in different categories, is really powerful. Why is it good for computer vision? Like if you want, yeah.
It just gives you a larger training set.
Yeah, you don't have to go annotate your data. You don't have to go find a good high-quality annotator and teach them what to do. Somebody already did that work. And you can just try your algorithms on these different data sets. And you can compare your algorithms to other people's algorithms and see, like, well, is hog features better or is color histogram features better? Well, I can actually run it on these different data sets and quantify how well things work. So people, researchers, are really good at optimizing gradients, right? So optimizing scoring functions. So when you give them a data set like this or you know, a bunch of these data sets, researchers are really good at finding algorithms that work really well on these data sets. And that's led to tremendous progress in all areas of AI. So a lot of times when you're thinking about machine learning problems, it's really important to think about, like, what data set are you going to use and what metric are you going to use to assess your performance? And you have to be looking at at those numbers. If you're not, then you can make changes to your algorithm, you could tune the parameters, you could try SVMs, and you could try logistic regression, and you wouldn't know if it worked better or worse. You might kind of try a few examples, but it wouldn't tell you over large classes of objects. So that's what's good about them. There's sort of angst in computer vision right now, though, because there's some problems with these data sets. There was another paper by Antonio Torralba. It's called An Unbiased Look at Dataset Bias. So what they pointed out, what they noticed, they basically invented this game. And the game is called Name That Dataset. So what you're supposed to do is look at these pictures. These are pictures from different ones of these data sets. And then label the picture with the data set that it came from. So I am not good at this task, but it turns out that computer vision researchers are really good at it. so they did like tests around their lab with this game, and people who are familiar with all of these data sets, who are doing research in this area, can get about 75% of these correct. So looking at these pictures, they can assign the correct data set to the pictures. Does that make you feel good or worried? A little worried, right? So why does that make you worried? Yeah.
Because you're over-tailoring things to these specific data sets, they might be generalized.
Right, exactly. So like if the data sets have these like fundamental characteristics, which it seems like they do, you might not be building a general car detector, you might be building a Caltech car detector. And maybe all the Caltech cars are side shots, for example, and a frontal shot isn't going to work. Or maybe they're all taken from a particular camera, and it might even be worse. Like maybe all their cars came from one camera and with certain properties of how the lens worked, and all their people came from another camera type, and it's just learning to classify based on that rather than actually learning to recognize what cars are really going to look like in real images. So what they did was basically had a computer play the same game. So they tried to make a classifier. They're using the same features that we talked about, the hog features, that takes as input an image and tries to tell you what data set it came from. So it says this one I think came from Label Me, and this one I think came from Sun, and this one I think came from Pascal. And it turns, and chance in this is like 8%, right? So this is the dotted line here of accurately identifying the image if you just pick a data set at random. And it turns out that like you can do it. Like you can do far better than chance. So they're getting almost 40% accurate with these hog features at predicting the data set that an image comes from. So this is, again, like not just with like straw testing with people, but like quantitatively showing that an algorithm is able to assign the data set, the picture to the data set. So there really are some kinds of specific features about what's going on here. So again, this should make you nervous. And what they did to sort of, so this is kind of like making us nervous, to actually look at the problems, they actually tested generalization. So they trained, so what a lot of people in computer vision do when you're training classifiers is you'll take one data set like Pascal, you'll have some part be held out and some part be your training. You'll test your car classifier, your person classifier on the training set, and you'll test it on the test set in the same data set and see how well it works. Here they're doing that same idea, but they're training on one data set and then testing on another data set. And as they add more training examples, they're adding more from that same data set. And in all these pictures, the bold line is the one that was trained on that same data set. So this is what normally you do as a computer vision researcher is when you train and test. And so here you can see that like a lot, so sometimes it's good, like this blue one, Pascal, is able to predict a lot of the ImageNet images, but a lot of times it's really bad. Like, so this is really sad, right? Like, this is the Caltech 101 car data set, and when you self-train, you do really, 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 really well. You're asymptoting out your performance. You're getting them almost all right. But when you train on these other data sets, you are dramatically worse. So your classifier, even though it worked really well when you're on the same data set, it is working a lot less well in these other data sets. So I think it's worth knowing about these types of issues because it's really pervasive in sort of practical machine learning. Like you can think that you're doing something really cool, but then when you try to run it on the real data, or you try to run it outside of where you've trained it, you might see a dramatic drop in performance. And we as a field, as researchers, sort of struggle with this issue. It doesn't mean the data sets are not useful, because we wouldn't even, we almost wouldn't get off ground zero without these types of data sets. But I think it is worth not taking them for granted. They're not handed down from us from heaven or something, and we just have to stick with them. It's an open question what data you should be using for your specific problem, and it's based on what you're trying to do with the data. So what do you guys think we should do to collect data for these types of problems? Yeah?
I think you can combine all of the data sets to create a really huge data set.
Yeah, so you can have lots of different people collect data sets and then hope that by getting just like the biggest possible data set of everything. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I like that. Yeah.
Once we have that data set, we could sort of like look at where the holes are and then try and like take those pictures ourselves. And
yeah. So that's something called active learning, where you try to make the algorithm aware of what it knows and what doesn't know, and then have it go off and collect additional information to train. And that's actually something I'm really excited about with robotics, because you could ask people to collect these pictures, but you could also have a robot drive around or look through its perceptual memory and try to find these examples that are missing. So I like that idea too. Any others? Yeah? No.
Cross-training, you can use multiple data sets.
Yeah?
Train on all except one, test on that one.
Yep.
Do that for every possible combination.
Yep.
That way you can figure out which data sets are good and bad.
Yeah, that's good. So cross-validation. Yes, and that's sort of the, I don't think they actually did cross-validation, but that's kind of the steps that they were going in this paper. Like trying to introduce the idea that we can't just stick with one data set, but like let's use different ones and understand the strengths and weaknesses of the different types of data that we have. Yeah?
I was just going to say with that, it seems like you're still susceptible to sort of meta bias, right? Like, because the thing you're validating on is the data set itself, and so you just end up being consistent within your data set,
yeah.
But your data sets as a whole might still be
Yeah. Yeah, so it really comes back to the task that you're trying to solve. So your data set, like if you're just trying to do better on all of your data sets, then that's good as long as your data sets are what you're really trying to do. If your data set isn't a good reflection of what you're really trying to do, then you might be climbing a gradient in terms of how well these systems work, but it might be the wrong gradient. It might not actually lead to your robot really being able to pick things up more robustly in the world, or it might not lead to your surveillance system really being able to detect faces with higher accuracy, or detect activity recognition with higher accuracy. Okay, so that was that question. Okay, so we talked about in our machine learning view of the world the features. In these gradient-based features, we talked about data sets and training sets and where they come from. And some of the questions that people ask as we collect these data sets, you know, what some of the things you have to think about as you construct these types of data sets. So now we're going to talk about the last thing you do to make machine learning algorithms better, which is better models. And we'll talk about Pedro's parts-based model for detecting people and bicycles and stuff like that for object recognition. So this was, these are called parts-based models. And the basic idea is one you guys already came up with earlier in class. Don't make a person detector. Make a head detector and an arm detector and a leg detector and combine them. And hope that those individual part-based detectors can give you more accurate information about whether there's a person than just doing the flat, direct person-based detector. So what this looks like when you do it is you have, in his system, you have this high-level model. So that's like the high-level person detector, just like we had before. It's the same thing. And what that does is it lets you quickly see if a region is plausible for a person. So like we were talking about at the beginning when you're sliding your window around, what they'll do is they'll run just the high-level detector to see, does it look like a good area to explore with our low-level detectors. And then they have these different parts-based models, so you can see them here in their sort of idealized locations. So the head, the two sides of the torso, and the two parts of the leg. And those, again, are gradient, like histograms of gradients with weights. But then, so you're sort of going to separately run a head detector, like you were saying. Who said that, the face detector? You're going to run a head and face detector. You're going to run an arm detector. You're going to run a leg detector. And then this sort of map that shows where the different parts are supposed to be relative to each other. So basically, you know, if you have a head detector, it's unlikely that the head's going to be down here by the feet. Like there's sort of orientation of where the parts typically are relative to each other. And that's what this heat map is showing. Like the dark areas here are where those different parts like to be, where they're most often seen in the training data. Okay, so what's hard about this? Yes?
You have to explicitly define what a person is by defining it has a head, two arms, two legs. Which
Yeah.
means that if you wanted to start like building with your vocabulary, you just have to kind of put that all by hand.
Right. Right. So this goes back to the label me question that we had before. Like, you know, how do I decide what those parts actually are, and how do I learn the model parameters for what this looks like? So sort of, you know, how do we learn models for the parts, and how do we combine them together? And I'm not going to have, I don't have time to go into the whole details of how Pedro does this, but like the big advance in his work, that's sort of the meat of the algorithm, was a way to learn that stuff automatically. So the approach that he used is sort of an EM-style algorithm. So who's heard of expectation maximization? A few of you. Okay. So this, you're not going to go into the whole details of it, but this is sort of this pattern of algorithm happens a lot when we have this idea of what are called latent variables. So the idea is that if we want to have a person detector, and our training set only consists of these bounding boxes of persons. It doesn't tell us where the head is and where the arms are. And of course we could go have people try to label them, but that's a lot of work, and it's both a lot of work for people to do, and it's a lot of work to figure out what the different parts are. We don't want to have to learn that stuff. We don't want to have to annotate that stuff or make decisions about it. We want the computer to decide what those things are. So the way that these training algorithms work is kind of like this chicken and egg problem. So if only we knew those model parameters. So like let's just pretend that we knew the parts. We knew that the hands were supposed to be here and the head was supposed to be here, and these were the shape-based features for what they were going to do. Then if we had an image, like so an image in our training set where we knew there was a person, we can use our model to predict where all those things are. Does that make sense to everybody? If we magically had the model parameters, we can run our model, and we can just say, our model says the hands are here and the head is here, and stuff like that. That's okay? Okay, so now let's sort of pretend the other situation is true. So if we had the parts, we could learn our model parameters. So just like you were saying, if we actually had somebody go through and do all these annotations on a lot of different images, we're back into our supervised training, right? So we could use the same histogram of gradient features and SVMs and come up with feature weights for what this looks like. So it's a kind of a chicken and egg thing. So what people do in these kinds of situations is they define an iterative algorithm where you flip back and forth between each of these two steps. So what you do is you make up some model parameters. You just randomly initialize them. And then you use those parameters to predict the parts for the images in your training set. And then after that, you use those predicted parts to train your model and give yourself updated model parameters. And then now that you have new model parameters, you can predict better parts, maybe, hopefully. That's the hope. A lot of this is hopeful, right? You predict new parts. And then you can train again and sort of jump back and forth between predicting what is in your training set and then using that to train better parameters. And that high-level algorithm appears over and over and over in machine learning. The sort of archetypal version is expectation maximization, but versions of it appear in lots of other types of training problems when you don't know some of the variables. So what, does this make you nervous, or does this make you feel happy?
It would just like keep getting worse and worse because
yeah.
it's depending on itself.
Yeah, so this is not a convex optimization problem. So you could imagine having it, so what happens is exactly what we're talking about. You can get to a local optima that's nowhere near the global optima. So a lot of the magic, sort of the meat, I guess, of these papers and how these algorithms work is the tricks they had to do to make that not happen. So typical, and this goes back to our hill climbing based optimizations that we were talking about with at the beginning of the term, simulated annealing and things like that. You do lots of random restarts, and you are smart about the examples that you're training on. So one of the contributions of Pedro's work was selecting good negative examples that were very informative in the right directions to make the algorithm work better, and sort of doing lots of stuff to make this work. But it turns out that when you do get all that black magic right, it works really well. And this is kind of the state of the art for object recognition. So this is the results in his paper. It's probably a little better now because we're 4 years later. But this was like but he's still so variants of this model. I don't know what the newest variants are, but variants of this kind of hierarchical approach are achieving state of the art. And this is, you're sort of getting 4D3% precision. So it's still not great, but it's getting better all the time. Okay, so that's sort of machine learning stuff. We're almost done. I guess I just wanted to sort of set this in context. So once we have object recognition, it's not like all of our problems are solved. So there's still a lot of things we have to do before and after object recognition in order to get to useful behavior. So like, for example, if you're a robot, you might know that there's a person somewhere in the picture, but you don't just want to know that, you want to know like, where are they in my local space so that I can drive around them and not run over them. If you're a robot, you might also want to be able to predict what they're going to do next. So like, if I'm a car and I'm driving and there's a person, and they're kind of walking across the street, even if they're not actually in front of me yet, I might want to know that change in their location is happening so I can slow down and stop before they're actually in front of me without having to slam on my brakes, for example. And then we talked already about manipulation. So like, I know there's a mug in front of me, but I might want to know exactly where should I put my hand in my gripper so that if I close my gripper, I'm going to actually pick up the mug and take it somewhere. So there's sort of a lot of sort of 3D information that might be missing. There's also some like really interesting examples when you start hooking this up to language. So This is one of my favorite examples from our work on cooking. So the instruction was bake in the preheated oven for 45 minutes until the top of the cornbread starts to brown and show cracks. So we can do this, right? Like here's 2 pictures of cornbread. And you know, which one is brown and shows cracks? This one, right? Like it's easy. But we don't have algorithms that can do this. And what we just did, what this language just did for you guys is it caused you to immediately synthesize a classifier with no training examples, no new training examples, that was 100% accurate. Like you know, you can take these pictures and immediately tell which one matches and which one doesn't match. So some of the things that I think are really important to think about is how we can get this kind of compositionality and this task-based, flexible task-based recognition performance without having to explicitly give it, like who wants to go off and annotate 100 examples of cornbread that's brown and not brown every time you follow a recipe. That's not, you know, it's not going to scale. There's too many different variants. Yes?
But aren't there like don't we like implicitly have tons of training examples, like having lived a life? Yes.
So no new training examples. Yeah, so if you imagine asking this of my son Jay, who's never had cornbread before, he wouldn't be able to do it. Or having a new type of food, I guess. I don't know, or doing this in some language that you hadn't seen before. But you were able to, somehow you were able to reuse really fast too. Like it wasn't like you had to sit for 5 minutes and retrain your model. You know, you're just able to look at this and know that it matches the language. So I think it's really important to think about these kinds of, like what is the real question that you're trying to solve when you apply a machine learning algorithm? All right, thanks guys.